Princess Charlotte walked quietly through the long corridors of Kensington Palace, her small shoes making soft sounds on the polished marble floors. The 9-year-old princess loved exploring the palace during quiet moments when most people were busy with their duties. Today felt different, though. The autumn sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting dancing shadows on the walls filled with portraits of her ancestors. Charlotte had always been curious about the people who worked at the palace. She knew their faces and often smiled at them when she passed by. Her parents, Prince William and Catherine, had taught her to be respectful to everyone, no matter what job they did. They explained that every person who worked at the palace was important and deserved kindness. As she turned the corner near the East Wing, Charlotte heard raised voices coming from a small corridor she rarely visited. Her steps slowed down as she recognized the angry tone of someone shouting. The princess had been taught not to eavesdrop, but something about the harsh words made her feel uncomfortable. She pressed herself against the wall and listened carefully. The voice belonged to Lord Pemberton, a visiting dignitary who had come to the palace for important meetings with her father. Charlotte had met him briefly during a formal dinner 2 days earlier. He had seemed polite then, but now his voice sounded mean and demanding. She could hear him talking to someone in a very rude way. "You incompetent fool," Lord Pemberton was saying loudly. "Do you have any idea who I am? I specifically requested that my car be brought around immediately, not in 10 minutes. When I give an order, I expect it to be followed without question or delay." Charlotte peered around the corner carefully and saw the scene that made her heart sink. Standing in front of Lord Pemberton was James Mitchell, one of the palace guards she had known since she was very small. James was a kind man in his early 30s who always had a warm smile for her and her brothers. He had been working at the palace for almost 8 years and was known for his gentle nature and dedication to his job. James stood at attention, his face red with embarrassment as Lord Pemberton continued his harsh words. The guard's hands were clasped behind his back, and Charlotte could see that he was trying very hard to remain professional despite the unfair treatment he was receiving. "I apologize, sir," James said quietly, his voice steady despite the obvious stress. "The car will be ready in just a few more minutes. There was a small delay with the driver, but I can assure you that everything will be prepared shortly." Lord Pemberton stepped closer to James, his face twisted with anger. "A delay? Do you think my time is worthless? I have important business to attend to, and your incompetence is making me late. Perhaps you're not suitable for this position if you can't handle such simple tasks." Charlotte watched as James's shoulders tensed slightly, but he maintained his respectful posture. She knew that James took great pride in his work, and that he always did his best to help everyone at the palace. Seeing him being treated so unfairly made her feel angry and sad at the same time. "Sir, I understand your frustration," James replied carefully. "I take full responsibility for any inconvenience. Would you like me to personally escort you to the car when it arrives?" "Don't patronize me with your false courtesy," Lord Pemberton snapped. "I want to speak to your supervisor immediately. Someone needs to explain to me why the staff here is so poorly trained and unprofessional." Charlotte felt her cheeks burning with indignation. James was one of the most professional and helpful people she knew. He had always been patient and kind with her family, often going out of his way to make sure they felt safe and comfortable. During her 6th birthday party, James had even helped her find her lost toy rabbit when she was crying about it. The young princess remembered other times when James had shown his good character. Once, when she had fallen and scraped her knee while playing in the garden, James had been the first person to help her. He had stayed calm and gentle, making sure she was okay before calling for the palace doctor. Another time, during a thunderstorm that frightened her, James had told her funny stories to distract her while they waited for her parents. Lord Pemberton continued his verbal attack, his voice getting louder and more insulting. People like you should be grateful to have jobs at all. The royal family deserves better than incompetent servants who can't follow simple instructions." Charlotte noticed that James flinched slightly at the word servants, but he still maintained his professional composure. She could see the hurt in his eyes, though he tried to hide it. The princess knew that James was much more than a servant. He was a protector, a friend, and someone who truly cared about her family's well-being. "I will contact my supervisor immediately, sir," James said, reaching for his radio. "Is there anything else I can do to assist you while we wait?" "Yes," Lord Pemberton said with a cruel smile. "You can learn how to do your job properly, or find a new one where your laziness won't affect important people." That comment made Charlotte's hands clench into small fists. She had heard enough. Her parents had always taught her about fairness and treating people with respect, and what she was witnessing went against everything she believed in. James didn't deserve this treatment, especially from someone who was a guest in their home. The princess took a deep breath and thought about what her grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had always told her about standing up for what was right. The Queen had explained that being royal meant having the responsibility to protect and support others, especially those who couldn't defend themselves in certain situations. Charlotte knew that James couldn't really defend himself against Lord Pemberton because of his position. If James responded with anger or stood up for himself too strongly, he might lose his job. The palace staff were expected to remain professional and respectful at all times, even when facing unreasonable behavior from visitors. As she watched the scene continue, Charlotte made a decision that would surprise everyone involved. She straightened her small shoulders and walked purposefully around the corner. Her chin held high with the quiet confidence that seemed to run in her family's blood. "Excuse me," she said in her clear young voice as she approached the two men. Both Lord Pemberton and James turned to look at her with surprise. James's eyes widened with concern, probably wondering why the young princess was in this part of the palace alone. Lord Pemberton's angry expression quickly changed to a fake smile when he saw who had interrupted them. "Your Royal Highness," he said with an exaggerated bow, "what a pleasant surprise to see you here." Charlotte looked directly at Lord Pemberton, then at James, who was clearly worried about what might happen next. She could see the gratitude in the guard's eyes, even though he probably wished she hadn't witnessed the uncomfortable situation. "I was wondering if everything was all right," Charlotte said politely but firmly. "I heard voices and wanted to make sure no one needed help." Her innocent words carried more weight than anyone might expect from a 9-year-old, and both men immediately understood that the young princess had heard more than they initially thought. Charlotte's presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the corridor. Lord Pemberton's face became pale as he realized that the young princess had likely heard his harsh words toward James. He tried to maintain his composure, but his nervous fidgeting made it clear that he was uncomfortable with the situation. "Your Highness, there's no problem at all," Lord Pemberton said quickly, his voice now much softer than before. "I was simply discussing some arrangements with this gentleman here." James remained silent, unsure of how to handle the delicate situation. He didn't want to cause any trouble for the princess, but he also couldn't deny what had happened. His training had taught him to stay quiet in such circumstances and let others handle any conflicts. Charlotte looked at both men with the wisdom that seemed beyond her years. Her parents had always encouraged her to think carefully before speaking, especially in situations that involved adults and their complicated relationships. "Mr. James," she said, turning to the guard with a warm smile, "I was hoping to ask you about the new security procedures Papa mentioned at dinner yesterday. Do you have a moment to explain them to me?" James was surprised by her question. There had been no discussion about security procedures at any recent family dinner. And he knew that Princess Charlotte was creating a reason to redirect the conversation. Her intelligence and quick thinking impressed him, but he also felt concerned about putting her in a difficult position. "Of course, Your Highness," James replied carefully. "I would be happy to discuss that with you. Perhaps we should find a more appropriate location for such a conversation." Lord Pemberton realized that his behavior had been witnessed by someone who could potentially create problems for him. The royal family's opinion mattered greatly for his business interests, and having Princess Charlotte view him negatively could affect his future dealings with the palace. "Princess Charlotte," Lord Pemberton interrupted with forced friendliness, "I hope you didn't misunderstand anything you might have heard. I was simply having a professional discussion about palace services." Charlotte turned to face Lord Pemberton directly, her blue eyes steady and clear. She had inherited her father's ability to remain calm under pressure and her mother's skill for handling social situations with grace. "I understand that sometimes grown-ups have different opinions about how things should be done," she said thoughtfully. "But I also know that everyone who works here does their best to help our family and our guests feel comfortable and safe." Her words were carefully chosen, but their meaning was clear to both men. She was defending James without directly accusing Lord Pemberton of wrongdoing. This diplomatic approach showed remarkable maturity for someone her age. Lord Pemberton shifted uncomfortably, realizing that his earlier harsh words had been inappropriate and potentially damaging to his reputation. "Yes, well, of course everyone here works very hard. I simply had some concerns about timing, but I'm sure they will be resolved quickly." "Mr. James always makes sure everything runs smoothly," Charlotte continued, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. "He helped me when I fell in the garden last month, and he always remembers to ask about my piano lessons. I think he's very good at his job." James felt touched by her kind words, but he also worried about the princess getting involved in adult conflicts. He knew that her parents would want to know about this situation, and he hoped it wouldn't create any problems for her. "Your Highness is very kind," James said quietly. "I always try to do my best for your family and for all the guests who visit the palace." Charlotte nodded approvingly, then turned back to Lord Pemberton. "I'm sure you understand that everyone here cares very much about making sure visitors have a good experience. Sometimes there are small delays, but it's usually because people are being extra careful to do things properly." Her explanation was both reasonable and pointed. She was giving Lord Pemberton a way to back down from his harsh position, while also making it clear that she expected better behavior from guests in her home. "Yes, you're absolutely right, Princess," Lord Pemberton replied, his tone now completely different from what it had been before. "I may have been a bit impatient about my schedule. These things happen, and I appreciate everyone's efforts to accommodate my needs." Charlotte smiled at his response, but her eyes showed that she understood exactly what had really happened. She was young, but she wasn't naive about adult behavior and the way some people treated others when they thought no one important was watching. "I'm glad we could clear that up," she said diplomatically. "Mr. James, would you like me to walk with you to check on the car? I was heading outside anyway to meet Mama in the garden." James understood that the princess was offering him a graceful way to leave the uncomfortable situation. He also realized that her presence would ensure that Lord Pemberton couldn't continue his earlier behavior once they were gone. "That would be lovely, Your Highness," James replied gratefully. "I believe the car should be ready now, and I can escort you to the garden afterward." As they prepared to leave, Charlotte turned once more to Lord Pemberton with the polite but formal manner that royal children learned from an early age. "I hope the rest of your visit goes well, Lord Pemberton," she said. "Please let someone know if you need anything else. I'm sure Papa would want all our guests to feel welcome here." The mention of her father, Prince William, was subtle but effective. Lord Pemberton immediately understood that any complaints about his treatment could potentially reach the highest levels of the royal family, which could be very problematic for his future relationships with the palace. "Thank you, Princess Charlotte," he replied, bowing slightly. "You've been very gracious, and I look forward to continuing my discussions with your father later today." As Charlotte and James walked away together, the young princess felt satisfied that she had handled the situation properly. She hadn't been rude or accusatory, but she had made it clear that she wouldn't tolerate people being treated unfairly in her home. "Thank you, Your Highness," James said quietly, once they were out of Lord Pemberton's hearing range. "You didn't need to do that, but I appreciate your kindness." Charlotte looked up at him with a serious expression. "Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, Mr. James. That's what Mama and Papa always tell us. Besides, you're not just someone who works here. You're part of what makes this place feel like home." Her words meant more to James than she probably realized. Working in the palace could sometimes feel impersonal, with strict rules and formal procedures governing every interaction. Having the young princess acknowledge him as a person, rather than just a staff member, touched his heart deeply. "Your parents have raised you well," James said with genuine admiration. "You handled that situation with more grace than many adults would have managed." Charlotte smiled at the compliment, but her expression quickly became thoughtful again. "Do you think Lord Pemberton will cause any trouble because of what happened?" James considered her question carefully. He didn't want to worry her, but he also wanted to be honest about the potential consequences of the encounter. "I don't think so," he said finally. "People like Lord Pemberton usually prefer to avoid any attention when they've behaved poorly. He probably hopes the whole thing will be forgotten quickly." As they reached the main entrance where Lord Pemberton's car was waiting, Charlotte saw that everything was indeed ready for his departure. The driver was standing by the vehicle, and other staff members were nearby to assist with any final needs. "See?" Charlotte said to James with a small smile. "Everything worked out perfectly, just like it always does when you're in charge." James couldn't help but smile at her confidence in him. The young princess had a gift for making people feel valued and appreciated, which was a remarkable quality for someone so young to possess. Word of Princess Charlotte's intervention spread quickly through the palace, though not in the way anyone might have expected. The young princess didn't tell anyone about the incident herself, but James felt it was important to report what had happened to his supervisor, as was proper protocol when royalty became involved in any staff situation. Within hours, the story had reached Prince William and Catherine through the appropriate channels. Both parents were proud of their daughter's instincts to protect someone being treated unfairly, but they also wanted to understand exactly what had occurred and ensure that Charlotte hadn't been put in an inappropriate position. That evening, during their family dinner, Prince William gently brought up the subject with Charlotte. Her younger brothers, Prince George and Prince Louis, were busy with their own conversations about football and school projects, giving her parents the perfect opportunity for a quiet discussion. "I heard you had an interesting encounter today," Prince William said carefully, watching his daughter's reaction. "Would you like to tell us about it?" Charlotte looked up from her plate, her blue eyes meeting her father's with the directness that had become her trademark. "You mean with Lord Pemberton and Mr. James?" "Yes," Catherine said softly, reaching over to touch her daughter's hand encouragingly. "We'd like to hear your side of what happened." Charlotte took a moment to organize her thoughts, just as her parents had taught her to do when discussing important matters. "I was walking through the East Corridor when I heard someone being very mean to Mr. James. Lord Pemberton was saying awful things and calling him names." Prince William and Catherine exchanged glances, both feeling proud and concerned at the same time. They were pleased that Charlotte had recognized unfair treatment when she saw it, but they also worried about her becoming involved in adult conflicts. "What did you decide to do?" Catherine asked gently. "I knew that Mr. James couldn't really defend himself because of his job," Charlotte explained thoughtfully. "So I went over to interrupt them. I was polite to Lord Pemberton, but I made sure he knew that I had heard what was happening. Prince William smiled at his daughter's wisdom. "And how did Lord Pemberton react when he saw you?" "He became much nicer very quickly," Charlotte said with a small smile of her own. "I think he realized that being mean to our staff wasn't a good idea when family members might find out." Catherine felt impressed by her daughter's understanding of the situation's dynamics. "Do you think you handled it well?" Charlotte considered the question seriously. "I think so. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble, but I also couldn't let someone be cruel to Mr. James when he was just doing his job. He's always been kind to us." That night after Charlotte had gone to bed, Prince William made a point of speaking privately with James. He found the guard during his evening rounds and asked for a few minutes of his time in a quiet office. "I wanted to thank you for the way you handled the situation with Lord Pemberton today," Prince William began, his tone warm and appreciative. "I understand it was a difficult position for you to be in." James stood at attention, though Prince William gestured for him to relax. "Thank you, sir. I hope Princess Charlotte wasn't upset by witnessing the incident." "On the contrary," Prince William replied with a proud smile. "She handled herself remarkably well. But I want you to know that you shouldn't have to endure that kind of treatment from anyone, regardless of their status or position." The prince's words meant a great deal to James, who had worked hard to maintain his professionalism despite the difficult circumstances. "I appreciate that, sir." The princess showed remarkable maturity in how she approached the situation. "She certainly did," Prince William agreed. "But I also want you to know that if anything like this happens again, you have our full support to report it immediately. No guest in this house has the right to treat our staff with disrespect." Over the following days, the incident had interesting consequences that no one had anticipated. Lord Pemberton, clearly embarrassed by his behavior and worried about its potential impact on his business relationships, sent a formal letter of apology to the palace. In it, he expressed regret for his impatience and acknowledged the professionalism of the palace staff. More surprisingly, he also included a personal note to Princess Charlotte, thanking her for her gracious handling of what he called a misunderstanding. The note was carefully worded, but it was clear that he understood exactly how much trouble his behavior could have caused him. Charlotte showed the note to her parents, who were amused by Lord Pemberton's obvious nervousness about maintaining good relationships with the royal family. They used it as an opportunity to discuss with Charlotte the importance of treating all people with respect, regardless of their position in life. The incident also had a positive effect on the palace staff's morale. Word had gotten out about how Princess Charlotte had stood up for James, and it reinforced their feeling that the royal family truly valued and cared about the people who worked for them. Many staff members had worked in other wealthy households, where they were treated poorly, so the contrast was meaningful to them. James found that his colleagues treated him with even more respect after the incident. Rather than seeing him as someone who had been embarrassed by a difficult guest, they viewed him as someone who had been defended by the royal family when he needed support. Catherine decided to use the situation as a teaching moment for all three of her children. During a family discussion, she talked about the importance of using their positions responsibly and always standing up for people who might not be able to defend themselves. "Being part of this family means we have opportunities that other people don't have," she explained. "But it also means we have responsibilities to use those opportunities to help others." Prince George, who was older and understood more about their family's role, asked thoughtful questions about when it was appropriate to intervene in situations and when it might be better to seek adult help instead. Prince Louis, being younger, was mostly interested in whether Lord Pemberton would be invited back to the palace. Charlotte assured him that their father would make good decisions about future visits. The story of Princess Charlotte's intervention became one of those family stories that would be remembered and retold for years to come. It represented something important about her character and the values that her parents were working to instill in all their children. Several months later, when James received a commendation for his excellent service record, Princess Charlotte made sure to congratulate him personally. She told him that she was proud to know someone who did his job so well, even when facing difficult circumstances. James would later say that Princess Charlotte's intervention had taught him something important about courage and kindness. Seeing someone so young stand up for what was right had inspired him to be more confident about addressing unfair treatment when he witnessed it happening to others. The incident also influenced how palace staff were trained to handle difficult guests. New procedures were put in place to ensure that staff members had better support when dealing with unreasonable behavior from visitors, and clear channels were established for reporting problems. For Princess Charlotte, the experience reinforced her understanding that her position in the royal family came with both privileges and responsibilities. She had learned that sometimes doing the right thing required courage, but that standing up for others was always worth the effort. Years later, when Charlotte was older and took on more formal royal duties, people would often comment on her natural ability to connect with people from all walks of life. Those who knew the story of her defense of James understood that this quality had been evident from a very young age. The incident became a defining moment that showed not just Charlotte's character, but also the kind of leadership style she would develop as she grew up. It demonstrated her belief that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their position in society. Prince William and Catherine often reflected on how proud they were of their daughter's instincts that day. In a world where it could be easy for royal children to become disconnected from the experiences of ordinary people, Charlotte had shown that she understood the importance of treating everyone with kindness and fairness. The story served as a reminder to everyone in the palace that even the youngest members of the royal family were watching and learning from the behavior they witnessed around them. It reinforced the importance of maintaining high standards for how people treated each other, regardless of their rank or status. In the end, what could have been just another unpleasant incident between a difficult guest and a staff member became something much more significant. It became a story about courage, kindness, and the power of doing what's right, even when you're only 9 years old and the adults around you might not expect you to get involved. Princess Charlotte had shown that age doesn't determine whether someone can make a positive difference in another person's life. Her simple act of standing up for James had not only protected him from further harassment, but had also sent a clear message about the values that her family held dear. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that true nobility comes not from titles or positions, but from how we choose to treat the people around us.